Driving on the wrong side of the road, and we're going to talk about apartheid. All that's coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here, and I rented a car today because I've got to go out and do an interview near Pretoria. And, they drive on the other side of the road here. So not only am I sitting on the wrong side of the car, driving on the wrong side of the road, but they gave me a standard shift rental car, and holy cow, my brain's about to explode. So I'm going to try to keep from getting killed here on my way out to this interview. But while I do that, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about apartheid. See, I'm going to go out and interview a victim today of these farm attacks. A white woman whose husband was murdered in one of these terrible attacks. And since I've been here, I've been thinking a lot about this whole deal. The apartheid, which went on for about 50 years, from the 1940s up until 1994. And I want to make it very clear at the outset, I am not making excuses for apartheid. I am missing my turn, though. I did just miss my turn. Okay. I'm not making excuses for apartheid. It was horrible. What I want to do, though, is I want to get a better understanding of what the justification was for apartheid. Why did the Dutch, by and large, the Afrikaners who, were responsible for implementing it, why did they think it was okay? What was it that they were trying to accomplish with apartheid? So, just in case you missed the whole apartheid deal in history when you're in school, that was where, it was basically separation. Apartheid means separation, keeping people apart. And in the case of South Africa, we're talking about racial segregation. There were a whole lot of rules put in place here in South Africa that governed what black people and colored people, that is mixed race, were allowed to do, where they were allowed to go, if they were allowed to travel. They had to have a pass to be able to travel anywhere. They had to use segregated beaches and restrooms and things like that. And that was all the way up to 1994. Now, I'm sure recall that we had the same thing in the United States until, it was ended in the 1960s. However, so we like to kind of get on our high horse in condemning apartheid because we ended it sooner. But we had essentially the same thing in the United States, and Jim Crow laws and all that sort of thing. So in talking with some of the older folks that I've been in touch with here, I've wanted to know, so why what was it about apartheid? Why did they implement it? Well, I think first you have to understand where these people came from. They were Dutch who came to this area in the about 100 years before, 1650, something like that, about 100 years before, little more than 100 years before the United States was founded, right? So you go back to that point in time, that point in history, and just like the pioneers who came to America, it was a very violent clash of cultures between the Dutch and the Aboriginals who were here. I don't know. That's not the right term. The Bushmen, they called them. If you've seen that absolutely wonderful movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy, one of the funniest movies of all time, those are the Bushmen, the ones that speak with the little clicking sounds. They go, that sort of thing. And the Dutch, made their way here, established a colony down in Cape Town, where I was yesterday, had some unpleasant dealings with the natives, and you can try to condemn them all you want, but they're doing exactly what the pioneers did in the United States, coming in. And I mean, there's enough room for both of them, without a doubt. I mean, this is a big country, and I don't fault them for moving in here. That's how it was done back then. There wasn't a title or deed to the land. There was enough land for everyone, and they moved in, and then they claimed some of the land for themselves. There's no question that the people that they did that from had done it from a different people group before them. And so it's the way it was done. You can't try to apply today's mores to people from the 1650s. It doesn't work. All right, so they came in, they established that colony, they had some unpleasant dealings with the locals. Obviously, the Bushmen had a far different culture, had a far different way of life, different worldview, different language, different everything. And so they were sort of self-segregating at that point. The Bushmen were not going to move in and live among them, and they weren't going to move into the Bushmen's colonies and live among those guys. As time went on, the black Africans, that we're talking Zulus and other tribes, moved down into this area. They weren't here originally, and started basically doing the same kinds of things that the Dutch had done, taking land for themselves. And again, there were more clashes there. The British came in the 1850s and claimed a whole bunch of land, and there were clashes between the British and the Dutch. So it's kind of the way it was. So, the Dutch came from a society that I don't think anybody could argue was more advanced technologically, socially, in every other way from the society that they supplanted, the Bushmen and the other African tribes. And they brought Christianity with them. And so they wanted to live their way of life. Now, you realize these people are related to the Pennsylvania Dutch, right? I mean, they are descended from the same people. So the Amish in the United States did the exact same thing. They came in, they wanted to practice their own way of life. And so they set up a community that's segregated from the rest of community. They believe that the Bible tells them to come out and be ye separate. The Pennsylvania Dutch do. And I'm sure that the Afrikaners here had a very similar mindset, very similar worldview. Be separate. And so in order to codify that, because they were in control of the government, in the 1950s, they implemented apartheid. If you think about it, the Pennsylvania Dutch practice a form of apartheid even today. I mean, if you went and said, I'm going to move in to your Pennsylvania Dutch community, they couldn't stop you, but they wouldn't be real happy about it. If you decided you wanted to start going to a Pennsylvania Dutch church, driving your car in there and wearing shorts and things like that you might do at your regular church or whatever, they would not take kindly to that. They want to live their way of life, which is very, very, very conservative. And not that they would forcibly expel you, I don't think, because they're pacifists, but they would not be happy with you being there if you decided to go live among the Amish. So think about the Afrikaners in the same sort of way. It's just that they had their own country at that point, and so they implemented that separation. They codified it into law. Again, not making excuses for the injustices of apartheid, and there were many. There were many injustices. But that was their mindset. And so, in reality, if you want to be completely honest about it, society worked fairly well in many ways under apartheid. They had much lower crime rate than they do now. Even some of the black people, the older black people that you'll meet today, will say we had it better under apartheid because the Afrikaners kept the lid on things and didn't let the crime get out of control. Now we have much more freedom. We can vote. We have, universal suffrage, that sort of thing. But the crime is out of control, and there are some. Look, I take exception to the fact. Again, please, I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. I am not justifying what they did under apartheid. I'm trying to illustrate for you what their mindset was as, implementing apartheid. So, but suffice it to say that under apartheid, they had a very strictly codified set of rules that made society run more smoothly than it does today. I don't know that that's necessarily such a good thing. I think you would be much better off. I would personally rather live in a place with unfettered freedom that isn't quite as organized, that isn't quite as safe, that isn't quite as, regimented. Whoa, car flipped over there on the other side of the freeway. There's a big backup here now. Okay, so, I personally would rather live in a place that's got a higher crime rate, but more freedom. I think that, freedom trumps all. We should live in a society where people are free to do what they want to do as long as your freedom doesn't infringe on my rights. So, talking to these guys and hearing their stories about how things used to be, it's really interesting to kind of hear the other side of that perspective. It wasn't so much about white supremacy, although I don't think that you could argue. A lot of people, when I was in college, I was an international studies minor for a while, and they like to argue that all cultures are created equal. That there's no culture that's better than any other. They're just different. It's like flavors of ice cream. Pick the one you want. I don't subscribe to that. Some cultures are just better. Some cultures have every culture has things that are wrong with it, but some cultures are extremely dysfunctional. Now, I could sit here for an hour and point out the dysfunction in American culture and how, in some ways, for example, Panamanian culture is superior, in my mind, to American culture in that it's a much more traditional society. They're very homogenous. They're very faith-based, very traditional values and family-oriented, that sort of thing. At the same time, yeah, I could point out some things that are very dysfunctional about Panamanian culture. That, they, for example, they don't have a sense of the value of time, and so they will waste massive amounts of people's time because it's just not valuable to them. That's just one, okay? So, I think if you measure cultures by how they enshrine human dignity, if you measure cultures by how they run efficiently, and there are measures like that. There are ways that you could measure cultures that would help you understand whether one is better than another. And I think that the white culture in South Africa has some very healthy aspects to it today, and did back then as well. But the expression of their culture under apartheid became very dysfunctional in their failed attempts to codify their worldview for all people in their culture. That's all there is to it. Now, remember, before you go judging, the United States had the exact same thing. And we got rid of it just in the greater scheme of things this long before the culture here in South Africa did. And the pendulum here in South Africa has now swung the other direction. So what I mean by that is I'm going to talk to a woman now who is a direct result. Her life story is a direct result of how it swung the other direction, because the government here is now tacitly endorsing the murder of whites to the point where hundreds of thousands of white South Africans are leaving the country to go somewhere safer. And that's a really bad thing. It's just as bad as apartheid was. And it's not justified. If apartheid was wrong, then what the government is doing today is wrong. And it would be profane for anyone to try to make the case that, well, this is what you get because you had apartheid, and the injustices under apartheid mean you deserve whatever you get now as the government endorses the murder of whites. That is absolutely profane. If it was wrong under apartheid, it's wrong now, and going the other direction. That's all there is to it. So that's our discussion about apartheid. We've got a lot of really good stuff coming up over the next couple of days. I'm working on my podcast from Cape Town that I shot yesterday, and that'll be out probably tomorrow because, man, I got some really good stuff there. So stay tuned. I'm Chuck Holton, and this has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.